Now, more of Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the only show directly addressing the problems and solutions for Illinois. Now, from AM 560, here's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project, on this edition of Illinois Rising, and analysis out this week by the Illinois Policy Institute, illinoispolicy.org, finds something interesting. It's a bit of a inside baseball issue, esoteric legislative issue, but it turns out to be instructive in terms of why people trying to understand why we have the worst governed state in the nation. The Illinois Policy Institute study looked at 938 bills between January 2015 and January 2017. 938 bills that were passed. Only 27 of those bills, or 2.9%, had fiscal notes. The fiscal note on legislation essentially gives the legislator some kind of indication of how much this will cost taxpayers to advance. It's essentially like the price tag of legislation. Between 2011 and 2012, going back a handful of years, fewer than 3% of the 1,173 bills passed in that General Assembly and enacted into law contained fiscal notes. So this is the trend over the last half a dozen years, at least, that just looking at the half a dozen years that the Illinois Policy Institute looked, 2-3% of bills that have fiscal notes attached. So you have members of the General Assembly who have demonstrated they're not particularly good at math or balancing numbers to begin with, who don't even get the numbers, and perhaps that highlights a relative indifference to other people's money.
Yeah, Dan, there are a number of states that require the fiscal note process on all the bills, right? So a legislator can see, okay, what am I voting for? I may even like this bill in concept, or maybe this is something that I think is important for our state, but hold on a second. I don't know if we can afford it. Let's take a look at the numbers. Apparently here in Illinois, that second part of it, I want what I want, that's part of it. But how do I pay for it has been completely ignored. So there are legislators on both sides of the aisle voting for and against bills, and they have no idea what the fiscal impact of that bill is going to be. And I think, as the study indicates and how you just mentioned, if you do this process over and over and over again, you get to where we're at now. And it is a little bit of inside baseball, but it's really important for the reason that you said. It gives an indication of what the sort of culture is, what the mentality is, sort of this idea that we can spend and spend and spend, and we don't care how much we spend or where it comes for or for what. And when you do that over and over again, you end up with all the problems that we have.
Well, and there's two other points, too. One, it provides for some accountability for government forecasting in terms of the cost of particular legislation. Usually the government's off by a factor of 10 to the detriment of taxpayers. And so, by attaching numbers to bills, including bills where it's not a direct outlay of taxpayer funds, but it could be a regulation that will have this projected impact on economic activity in a particular sector or the state more generally. See how good government is at forecasting impacts, so that can be refined to be better. Bring in better people who are better at econometrics than the people we have, if needed, number one. And number two, it gets people into a discussion about the costs of well-intended legislation. That may sound like a good idea, but here's what it actually translates to in terms of lost productivity and all of the daisy chain the daisy chain nature of regulation, frankly. Lost productivity means lost revenue generated, means inability to expand or hire that marginal employee. So it's just a much more textured and robust and adult conversation that looks at actual costs, tax outlays, as well as indirect costs and benefits, and then you have a more informed debate.
Right, and I recognize, Dan, that running a legislature, running government is not identical to running a business, but it has similar circumstances to it. And if you ran your business without fiscal notes, or the sort of the equivalent of what a fiscal note would be, you'd be out of business because you need to understand what everything costs, and then that informs your decision of whether you're going to do it, not going to do it, curb it back, expand it, or whatever. And what I think, and I don't know what the history on this is, it seems to me that if there was a legislator in both the House and the Senate that proposed that this would be required, like in these 10 plus other states, that it would be hard to argue against it from a legislative perspective, that it could be a campaign issue because all you'd be saying is, hey, all we want to know is make sure that we know what each piece of legislation costs. Imagine if someone wanted to vote against that. So this is something that I think could get momentum to pass in our state, and maybe legislators should think about that.
Well, the other thing is, look, even if it wouldn't change the voting that much, because there are a great percentage of the 177 legislators in the General Assembly that are indifferent to the cost of anything. If there's political benefit to be gained, if there's virtue signaling to be done, they just don't care. It's other people's money, and that's one of the differences, the main differences between government and the private sector. You're forced to care or you cease to exist. So that's one piece. The other piece is it's an educational tool for the electorate.
Correct.
So this keeps the electorate in the dark, or it requires organizations like the Illinois Policy Institute to be like, shadow government when it comes to putting price tags on legislation.
And that goes a long way, Dan, to showing why we don't have it, because it keeps the public in the dark and allows them in campaigns and everything else to pretend that they're doing something responsibly when perhaps they're not.